Hey darlings, welcome back to my channel. Thank you very much for being here. If you are new to my channel, please kindly click the subscribe button below. Turn on your notification bell so that you don't miss any of our tutorials. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you very much for always staying tuned. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to sew this skirt. Previously, I showed you how to make this pattern, and if you have not seen the video on how to make the pattern for this skirt, please check the description box below. I'll put the link to the video there. I advise you watch it first before you watch this one because it would make more sense to you. So we're going to start off with labeling our pattern. And I labeled mine, all the scales I created, I labeled it under two categories, category A and B, and numbered it from 1 to 6. So you need to label all these so that when you cut out your fabric with your pattern, you are not going to mix any of them as the other. So now you're going to decide where your overlapping will be. And I want 1B, my overlapping, to come from the left hand side of my skirt onto the right hand side. So I'm going to use 1B to cut the fabric for both 1A and 1B. I'll show you how it works. I need you to pay attention. So now I've cut out this. I'm going to show you how to use it to cut out your fabric and where to add your seam allowances as well. I'm also going to illustrate to you how you're going to use this 1B to cut out 1A as well. So I prefer to cut one after the other so that I don't mix things up. So I'm just going to cut out fabric for 1B first before I cut out another scale from my pattern. Now don't forget that you're working on the right side of your fabric. So you place your pattern on the right side of your fabric like this. And to start cutting, you first of all have to trace all around your pattern. So guys, if you are yet to subscribe to my channel, please kindly click the subscribe button below. Turn on your notification bell so that you don't miss any of our tutorials. If you're enjoying this tutorial so far, please don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. You can share my videos as well. Thank you. So now I'm tracing around my pattern, and the next thing I'm going to do is to add my seam allowances only at the under part of the lower part of my pattern. That is where you need the seam allowance for this particular 1B, and this is going to reflect also on 1A. You only need seam allowance here on the lower part of your pattern. You don't need it at the waistline because the upper part represents your waistline. So you're going to cut this out and set it aside. Now remember, I told you I'm going to use 1B to cut 1A, but to do that I'm going to rotate this towards this way in order to create the one that will match 1A, since I want the overlapping to come from 1B onto 1A. So you rotate this, place it on the right side of your fabric, trace out your pattern. Remember, you're not going to add seam allowance at the top layer of your pattern. So right here, after tracing out, you add your seam allowance just as you have on the panel of 1B. Then you indicate the midpoint of your skirt. That is the center front of your skirt. And then you're going to cut this out and set it aside. Make sure you pin the patterns onto the fabric you cut out to avoid confusion. Now I'm going to remove the pattern for A off the scale, and we're going to cut 2A. So now I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to show you the difference between cutting the first step, that is 1A and 1B, and cutting the ones of 2A and the rest of the pattern. Now remember that you're cutting on the right side of your fabric. You're placing your pattern on the right side of your fabric. Trace out your pattern on your fabric. Add seam allowance to the lower side of your pattern. This will serve as your facing allowance. Now at the top layer, you need to add about 1.5 inch allowance to that. This will enable you, while sewing, to be able to hide your layers under the overlapping panels, overlapping scales. You understand better when we start sewing. So you add 1.5 seam allowance and you connect this together, and this is what your pattern should look like. Then at the front side area right here, you're equally going to add 1.5 inch seam allowance all through the front panel like this, and you're going to connect it like this. Next, you're going to cut this out, set it aside. Now I'm going to cut 2B and I'm going to repeat the same process on it. Now you trace out your pattern, add your seam allowance at the lower part of your pattern, extend the side seam line, add your 1.5 inch seam allowance, extend this line too, add your 1.5 inch seam allowance, connect it together. Then at the front area, add your 1.5 inch seam allowance. At the top layer as well, add your 1.5 seam allowance. Then you connect it together. As you can see, I'm following the curves and the shape as well in order to create some similarities here. So right here, I'm going to cut out 3A. You can see how the cutting goes. I'm following the trace we marked when we were creating our pattern. Now I'm going to show you how to cut the rest of the panel out. I know at this point you understand that making the skirt is quite interesting, and very soon after making one, you'll find the rest easier to make, because the problem comes only with the calculation of how to create the scales, how to cut out the fabric, where to put your seam allowance, how to arrange it while sewing. That's where the stress is. But as far as this video is concerned, I hope it will help you to recreate this style easily, maybe after your first try. And also note that these curves, you can equally decide to change the sizes of the scales or to change the shapes of the scale by making it straight instead of having curves below it. So you decide which one to give it a try after you must have become conversant with this one in particular. I'm hoping the next one I make, I'm going to make it a straight panel instead of having curves. I mean my scales having straight cuts instead of curves beneath it. So if you want to see that video, also let me know on the comment section below. Also, I want to see if I can use this pattern also to create a top or a sleeve, or to add it to a flare skirt. I don't know which I'll do next, but all of them are all on my list. Now I'm going to cut the final scale, which is 6B, and the next thing I'm going to do after cutting this is to show you how to cut it out on fabric. I believe I've done that enough. You will use the same technique to cut out the fabric for others. And this particular part of your skirt, which is this, is the leftover. You don't need it for this tutorial. I'm going to dispose it now, and you are going to see why later on while sewing. Now also remember that each panel you cut out a lining for it. So starting with 1B, we are going to start off with sewing. You place your facing fabric right side to each other on the scale, and you're going to sew with the seam allowance you left only below your fabric, and then you're going to notch it or cut off the excesses, turn it to the right side as you can see, Now the next thing is to stitch it at the side seam area and then at the top waistline area, and give it ironing press, and then place back the pattern on it and pin it up there so that you don't misplace it later. Now you're going to use the same technique to sew 1A. Now going over to 2A, I'm going to show you how to sew this up. Keep your pattern aside. Remember, this is the right side of your fabric. Then you're going to place your lining, your facing fabric on it, right side to each other. Then sew the lower part with the seam allowance you left. Remove excesses or notch it. Turn it over to the right side of your fabric. Give it a good pressing as well if you can. Then stitch the side areas from this area at the top layer and at this point as well, and set it aside. And you're going to use the same method to sew up the rest of your scale. So now, as you can see, I've sewn all my scales, the interfaces, the facing, the lining, I've done all. Then I still have my pattern all pinned up to my scales so that I don't confuse myself while joining my scales together. So I encourage you to do the same. Now the next step is to lay it on your skirt, and you're going to make the same 4-inch spacing marks as you have on your pattern onto your skirt area, and you do it just exactly as you have it on your pattern. Then we're going to start off with placing 1A. Now while placing it, you are going to follow the notch or the indication of the midpoint of your skirt, and you're going to place it on the waistline area as you have it now. Then for this is 1B. As I told you, I want the overlapping to come from 1B onto 1A. So this is it, what I mean. Now we are not going to sew up immediately, okay? I'm going to show you how to sew this up later on. So now the next thing I'm going to do is to show you how to place 2A on your pattern. Now to sew this onto you have to follow this line you made there. That is where your seam allowance stops, and you're going to match it with the line you have on your pattern at the side seam area only. Okay, so when you place it like this, you're going to also place your 2B as well. Let me set this aside and show you. You're going to follow the side seam line, this mark and the mark on your pattern. Place it like this on your scale, match it together. Then you put this on. While you make these scales, as you can see, the one on top and the one beneath, so you pay attention to it while placing yours to create the same effect. So this is it. So I hope you guys are enjoying this tutorial so far and understanding how to place your pattern to create the scales. So we are going to work on 3A. I'm going to show you how to make the next step. As I told you earlier on, I'm going to show you how to sew this up later on. So now I'm just going to show you how to place it first. So now for the 3B, you follow the same line, side seam line, place it right there. Is an indication line. So the next thing is to place your 3B appropriately, following the same lines I showed you earlier on. So if you follow the lines and if you cut out your patterns appropriately, you should have a matching pattern like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and place 4B and the rest of the pattern using the same technique and strategy. At this point, everything seems easier to do and fun to make as well. So I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying it right here. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up if you're enjoying it so far. So now I'm going to follow the same technique as you can see to place my skirt. So I'm going to show you how to sew this up, where and where to sew to keep your scales on the spot later on. So right now I'm just showing you how to place it on your skirt in order to create the effect of fish scales on it. So as you can see, this is what I have here. I'm going to go ahead and place my 5 as well and my 6 as well. So far so good. I hope you guys are enjoying this tutorial. Now we're almost done with placing our scales, remaining our 6A and then 6B. And I'm going to use the same technique I've been showing you so far to place this onto my skirt. And after doing that, the placement of scale on my skirt will be complete. I hope you guys are finding this interesting just as much as I'm enjoying it. Actually, this is the first time I'm creating this skirt with a fabric and on a scale of a human being before. So I hope you guys are enjoying this experiment just as much as I'm doing. Let me know what you think about this tutorial on the comment section below. If there's any other improvisation method you know or any other technique to do this, please kindly note it on the comment section below. Now after placing it, you should have something like this, and my scales are ready. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to sew it up to keep your scales on the spot. Now the first tip I'm going to tell you is to make sure that you stitch the inner part of your skirt before sewing up the side seam areas or thinking of hemming your skirt. So I'm going to show you a closer view on how to sew the inner part of your scales. Now this is 2A and 2B. After placing it, you're going to measure 1/2 inch above the seam allowance and stitch. This is to enable you when the layers fall on top of your skirt, the stitches will be hidden. Then you sew from this point all the way to this point. Then don't sew the side seam first, as you will need to lift each and every layer up in order to sew the other layers as well. So you're going to take the same procedure, measure 1/2 inch above your seam allowance, and then you stitch all the way to wherever your stitches can reach. Then from that point onwards, you're going to sew the rest of your scales. And then I highly suggest that you use your interlock machine to finish off the rough edges of your scales before sewing it onto your skirt. I didn't do it here because this is just the pattern we are creating and experimenting as well. So when you're creating with the real material, you have to do that. So now after sewing off my scales, that's when I sew the side seam and then hem the bottom line of my skirt. And this is what I have. Now I'm going to make the back side of my skirt just as you would for a normal pencil skirt. Place it right side to each other, sew the side seam, and this is what we have already right here. Then you're going to finish off the waistline of your skirt with whatever design you want to put there. And then the next thing is to sew on your waistband, and then your zipper and your skirt is ready. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this experiment just as much as I did. Don't forget to check out the video on how to create the pattern for this skirt. I'll put it in the description box below. Let me know what you guys think about this tutorial. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.